For Q&A, this is the one thing I've got to say. As mentioned earlier, that I drove tanks in the Marines, which left me with the gift of really great hearing. So there's three ways you can do it. You can either speak really loud, or you can have the question repeated to me, or I'll just make up what I think you might have said, and that always produces really humorous results. So one of those three. But with that, any questions?
I'll start, Dr. Merkle.
Okay.
Let's see. As a college president, you get to see incoming freshmen. What would you say is most lacking in freshmen that come to your school that perhaps parents could contemplate as they prepare them?
That's interesting. Okay. One of the things that I've noticed is, and I don't know if I'm just getting old and crotchety, or if this is an actual thing, but I think it's an actual thing. And that is, there was when I was growing up, if you were on a basketball team or at work, or even I can think of like first going into the Marine Corps, something like that, you would have people above you who would put hardship in your way. And they would put hardship in your way that frequently felt unreasonable, sadistic. It was this hardship that was put there. Like I go back again to that basketball coach who would blow the whistle 10 more times after it was an unholy amount of times. There was always this moment like you would feel punished, you would feel put upon, but then you could always see a little bit of a twinkle in their eye. And you understood that actually, yes, they're being hard on me, but they're giving me something. They're creating a way in which I can achieve glory, because there's something glorious about encountering hardship and persevering through it. And by creating a place in which I am challenged and pushed, and some are quitting and falling aside, but I am enduring and pushing on, by creating that kind of place and holding us that standard, they're actually like blessing me and giving me something and a chance to be something glorious. So there was something that was understood there. I think that as I see students coming in now, that seems to be gone. I think that it's very hard for the young people that I meet for them to see hardship as an opportunity for glory. It's an opportunity for resentment, to feel oppressed, persecuted, whatever. But it feels like they've not been raised in a world that sees this as like an opportunity for glory. And I think that that's really a tragic thing in America. I think that that's going to set us up for real hardship, because it means that like when I as a school am trying to set a hard standard and I say that paper wasn't good enough, you need to go back and try again, they fall apart. They kind of fall apart in a puddle on the floor rather than understand this is a chance for me to rise to something. So I think that one of the things that I would really encourage you to do is raise your kids with a sense that hardship is the field of opportunity for glory. This is where you actually can rise to something. Teach them to like revel in something difficult and achieving and persevering through it. Praise them when they're able to do that. That's, I think, something that's really missing now, and it's kind of ever present.
You mentioned in the first talk about how we are all in fellowship and the importance of having a spirit of joy, and maybe that was something you could dive more into in the Q&A. So,
how to do that?
Yeah.
I would say so. It's hard because how do you seriously like punish someone into joy? That doesn't work. That doesn't work. So you have to step back and have a kind of a theological lesson for a moment, because if you step back and you say, oh, okay, David talks about his unconfessed sin robbed him of the joy of the Lord, then there's something there that needs to be addressed. And it's and if they can confess it and deal with it, and you can pray with them, it can be removed and they can be restored into joy. So there's a discipline that needs to happen, but it's not I'm going to spank you until you're happy. Like that's not going to work at all. But you can address it until you've rooted out the sin. With our kids, if there was a kid who was in the sulks, we would speak to them first. Is there something wrong? We want to give them every opportunity to put this right. But if they're not putting it right, if it's not coming out, then we would do something, we called it obedience camp, which is basically, I'm just going to start laying down the law and demanding obedience from you. And when you fail to obey, then you're going to be disciplined, because then there's something that I can actually address. And as we discipline that, then we can start to get to whatever's at the heart. So, with little kids, it could be as simple as, okay, I need you to run upstairs, grab a sock and bring it back. I need you to, go get a plate, balance it on your head. I need you to do this. And if they sulk, if they refuse, and the thing is when they're out of fellowship, they won't obey. They just won't. When they're out of fellowship, they're going to find some way to disobey. And then we would discipline them for that and then we would pray and confess it. And usually whatever that stink was comes out with the confession and you get it all right. And then suddenly a kid who was off in the corner is now cheerful and in the middle. But we wouldn't allow that sulk to continue. Now, when they get older, a spanking is no longer appropriate, and it's not the right thing to use, but that doesn't mean that the sulk goes away. The sulk, your junior higher can go into a really deep sulk. And this is where we just would be persistent with, we're going to talk about this, and I'm going to pray with you, and we're not going anywhere until we've addressed this. And that might mean my wife, multiple times we show up to church and we've got a kid who's not all the way in fellowship. That means my wife is sitting in the car with that son, with that daughter, while I'm doing whatever until this is dealt with, until it comes out. But we would just stay at it in conversation and prayer until the sulk came out and everybody was in fellowship. And it's palpable. You can remember as a little kid, feeling miserable and everything until finally you got disciplined and then you're restored. And it's funny how often the kids come out of getting a spanking just skipping and happy and just totally cheerful because they've been restored to fellowship. And so basically that spirit of fellowship, 100% required at all times. And if it's not there, we stop and everything is on pause until we get that fellowship back. Now, initially that's going to sound like we will never go anywhere. We'll never go into a grocery store. We'll never go to church. We will only sit because this is so rooted in. You might not go anywhere at first. It might take a little while to get it all out at first. But once you've done the work and you establish that tone, then it's just tune-ups. And the tune-ups, it's deal. You can deal with it. You can take care of that when it pops up.
How can I recognize if I'm becoming the crank father? Talking about being the father who's always grumpy, over-disciplinarian. How can I see that in myself and correct?
Well, I think one question you've got to ask is, well, what kind of relationship do you have with your kids? Does it look like you have the kinds of kids that grandfather that kind of character would produce? It may be that you're just beating yourself up too much and you're more lovable than you realize. So I would say, what kind of kids are you producing? The other would be, that's where I think having your spouse is just really helpful. Think of the spouse as that mirror that helps you to see, what am I missing on the back of my head? I would ask her, I would ask your pastor, I would ask people like that can give you that kind of feedback. But look to your kids and then ask your spouse, and I think you can get a pretty good feel for if that's happening.
You mentioned music, movies, books, culture. What are the sort of ways that you start with your own culture, board games, whatever, and then you start to merge into the world's culture and have a greater conversation? What are the things that make your family, and then the things that make you part of something bigger than just we play Scrabble,
Yeah, well, I think this is where, honestly, this is what I loved about having my kids get a classical education, is that we were every day in those kinds of books and that kind of music constantly. In our house, we're probably there's the classical music of the education in our house at home is probably a lot more blues, but that's the Merkle home. But I would say in an education like that, you're constantly encountering those texts, those plays, those songs. But I think you do want to push it into pop culture. You want your kids and you to develop that sense of pop culture together. And I don't think there's a problem with watching movies, or listening to music on the radio, but I'm just arguing that you do it together.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to the Keep Your Kids conference. We're now going to segue to the Retrieve Your Kids phase. So please go pick them up, and let's give Dr. Ben Merkle a round of applause.